Welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager, and I am back here once again with Brad Wartman. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hey, Angela. Hiya, snobbies.
Hiya, snobbies. And Brad is here for every taping, even though you don't always see him, because he is our editor, Zoom master, if that can be your new title, Zoom master, editor extraordinaire. So he puts together all the episodes of Real Film Snobs, longtime friend and crew member of Real Film Snobs, and also film. I don't know if you're a film snob, but you're definitely a movie buff. We'll say that. Known for his love of sci-fi in particular, but all things movies. And so Brad is joining me on the show to review some new films today, and also some classics. So we're going to just kick it right off with our first movie this week, which is Operation Mincemeat, which I just love saying the title of this movie. Honestly, it's actually much more serious than the title implies. It's during World War II. Two British intelligence officers, played by Colin Firth and Matthew McFadden, are using a corpse and false papers to outwit the Germans. So, as we know, the English love making movies about World War II because that was one of their crowning glory moments, as do the Americans, of course. And this is yet another World War II tale of espionage and intrigue, which happens to have a very silly title, pretty much the most British title you can think of, in fact. In fact, it was exactly mincemeat is something Americans are like, we don't even know what that is. And there's a good reason for that. Mincemeat is kind of gross. But it also stars Kelly MacDonald, who seems to be in like every British films I see, pretty much, along with Colin Firth. And this is kind of an old-fashioned movie. It's a throwback. It's on Netflix, but it's the kind of movie I feel like years ago they used to make like several of these a year. Like British World War II movies with the heroic guys trying to do their best to outwit the Germans, and then you're like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Will we beat the Germans? Of course. And then in this case, there's also a little bit of a love triangle of sorts between Colin Firth, Matthew McFadden, and Kelly MacDonald. Although that's a little bit more in the background to this plot they're trying to devise to fool. The deal is they're trying to fool the Germans into thinking that they are going to invade Greece when they are actually going to invade Sicily. And the fate of World War II and the British hangs in the balance. So I know, Brad, you wanted to review this one, and I was interested enough to see it. I was like, sure, why not? I'll watch that. I enjoy Colin Firth, and I enjoy these actors. The director, John Madden, has made some good movies before. I liked this movie. I can recommend it. It kept me interested. It definitely is nothing, revolutionary or earth-shaking. It's just like a solid little drama that does its job and then gets out of the way.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to see this movie not just because of the film, but I'm pretty familiar with the story about
Oh,
Operation
okay.
Mincemeat. It was one of the World War II history is one of my little side interests, and Mincemeat was one of the major spy operations during World War II. And just to give some background, so the Allies were preparing to go on an invasion, and they were planning to. So they were trying to figure out a way to divert the attention of the Germans and the Italians, and what they wanted to do was try to convince them that they were going to invade Greece. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but anyway, it's the plot how they came about to doing it, and it's notable for a couple of things. One is just the nature of the plot. Another was that it involved somebody who anybody who follows James Bond knows that there was a secret agent named Ian Fleming who was part of
Mm.
this
Oh, I
group.
forgot to mention the Bond aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so and it doesn't. The movie doesn't really touch on him so much as he's more of a side character. But anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed this film, and like you were saying, at the time, in the 1940s, a lot of these kind of movies were coming out pretty regularly. And one of the things I liked about it was that it really has that kind of snappy British dialogue. Just
Hmm.
really little quick quips back and forth. And I thought Colin Firth did a very good job of that, as did and Matthew McFadden did a wonderful job, as well as Jason Isaacs, who plays their commanding officer, who is the guy who doesn't think this is going to pull off, but they're gonna keep it on the side burner to see what happens with it. Just a really good set of actors who really pull this movie off, and in a way that is pretty true to the actual book. And
Okay, so you've read the book this is based on.
yeah, yeah. The only thing I think was the was Kelly MacDonald, and she kind of came in only as part of the committee, which originally this was a product of what was called the 20 Committee, or the XX Committee, and the or the what was also known as the Double Cross Committee in England, the English spy agency. Anyway, she not only played a member of that, but she also kind of played a love interest role. And I was kind of like, oh, all right, you got to have a love interest somewhere. But I think one of the things that it did do was it showed that the people who were spies were not just spy masters or sleuths. They were also very human people with very human weaknesses and self-doubt, as well as brilliant insight that was controlling their lives. Because that was the whole thing. That one of the things they wanted to make sure was that this plan would succeed, because if the Germans got any kind of wind, any idea that this might be a fake plot, because they were looking for something like this,
Hmm.
then it would blow the entire operation wide
And
open.
it seems pretty shaky. I mean, Jason Isaacs, he's sort of the bad guy, but you can also see why he's so skeptical, because the plan seems a little bit, you're almost kind of amazed it worked, really, because it's like, we need to have this corpse. He needs to just pull. There were a lot of things that had to happen in order for this to work. Like the corpse has to arrive on the shore. They have to go digging into his pockets. They have to know that they can't trust the Italians enough that they're going to give the information over to the Nazis. The Nazis are going to have to believe the information they find on the guy. I mean, there's all these ifs, ands, or buts that have to happen.
Right.
Then we find out some of the things didn't happen the way they had hoped it would happen, but then it ended up sort of happening correctly anyway, despite their selves. So there's all these. I mean, for something that the entire war hinges on, I could see why Jason Isaacs' character was so skeptical about putting, the entire fate of the English military force on the line. And I did like the fact that even though they're spies, it's not actually the types of James Bond signs. There's no one out. There's no like gunplay and anybody running on the streets
Yeah.
and trying to dodge bullets. It's actually all these guys in a room just thinking about stuff, which can
And
be
there's
kind of
and there's
hard.
even there's even some comedy, in this one. In that, for instance, they find a body who is the right uh, type for what they're trying to do with this operation, and they decide they're going to put him in a uniform because they've got to take a photo of him so they can have a
Hmm.
photo ID. And so there's this wonderful scene where they're trying to photograph the corpse, and the corpse is like,
Yeah,
uniform.
yeah, right. Yeah. They're like, these photos are not going to work. This is not going to convince anybody. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it
So
was
then,
good.
so then they decide they're going to try to find somebody who looks enough like the person to
Yeah.
to match. And actually, the story, they only touched on a little bit of the story of the person the corpse that they used, but it's kind of a sad story. But in the end, he became a hero of sorts,
Hmm. Right, right.
but nobody could talk about. And it was also kind of interesting to also think about how, like, all these people, Colin Firth and all the others, had a whole side life that nobody knew about. Like Matthew
Hmm.
McFadden, he was I can't remember what it was, but his brother was the famous pilot in the family who had gone missing in Burma or something, and all the mother could do was pine for her lost son, who she missed so much because he was such the dear one, and so McFadden always kind of felt like like second best, and
Yeah,
yet he could never talk about it,
yeah,
So
yeah. Well,
great
anyway, I
film.
can recommend it. Yeah. So how many stars are you giving it?
I'll give it, out of four, like 3.5.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give it 3 stars.
I don't
So we
think it
can
was
recommend it. Yeah.
perfect. I don't think it was perfect, but I highly recommend watching it.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll move on to the next movie, which I think you're introducing.
Yeah, the Batman.
Yeah. Do we even need to talk about the plot? Do people not
The,
know what the Batman is about? Go ahead. I'll let you do your intro.
the Batman, or how many times can we remake the story of the Batman and still not get it right?
Still not get it right.
Well, I watched it, and yeah, I enjoyed it. It's a little long. It's like 3 hours long, and the movie stars Robert Pattinson and has Zoe Kravitz and um, Jeffrey Wright and a couple of other people. My first thought about this movie was watching this was, I've been in the age where I started off with Michael Keaton and have gone up through George Clooney and all the different Christian Bale
Christian
and all
Bale.
the
Yeah.
all the different iterations of Batman that have come around, and it was kind of like if the make director of Twilight had tried to make Batman, because it's that
Mm.
dark, deep, moody character, which in this film they don't concentrate so much on his origins like they did with Batman Begins or some other. They just kind of like dive right into it. And what's interesting is that some of the characters, like Catwoman, who's played by Zoe Kravitz, turns out not to be. I mean, they in many iterations, maybe not the Adam West version with Lee Merriweather, but they were always kind of enemies. But in this version, they are almost, I wouldn't say lovers, but they are romantically linked. You can definitely
Hmm.
see that part of it. Jeffrey Wright plays a very good Charles Gordon, and has a is a good foil for that. Um, the character that plays Alfred is Andy Serkis, who we know from The Hobbit, and but he's gotten more involved in live action roles. Does a really good job in this film, I think.
Yeah.
And the characters who plays the Joker and the Riddler. Well, no, I shouldn't say it.
No, it's not the Joker,
Plays
it's
the
the Riddler.
Riddler. Well,
Paul Dano does the
if
Riddler, yeah.
yeah, Paul Dana does a good job as a Riddler. If you watch the movie, be sure to watch the deleted scene, because there is an interaction in the movie between the Joker, who is also at Arkham Prison, and the Riddler, and there's a deleted scene that even teases that out quite a bit more. So it's a very, very good scene, and you should watch it because it provides a lot of perspective. But other than being kind of long, it was a pretty serviceable movie, and
It doesn't need to be. The thing is, the people are making a big deal about this Batman. Some of the critics, they're like, "Oh, it's like film noir." Really, he's a detective in the movie, which I do like about it. I like the fact that it's got a film noir aspect and he's a detective, because really, Batman. We were talking about this earlier to Ernie, but Batman is not really. He's a superhero who's not a superhero. He has no special powers. He's a rich guy who has the money for lots of tools, but he doesn't fling webs. He's not Thor with his hammer. He can't fly. I mean, he flies a little bit in this movie, but just because he has his special bat wings, he can fly, just kind of swoop. But he doesn't have special powers. He's not Superman. He doesn't have X-ray vision or can't lift steel, anything like that. So he's a regular guy who happens to have a lot of money to do things. So that's fine. And he's a detective in this movie. He's trying to put this piece together of what the clues the Riddler is leaving behind. So I liked that aspect of it, of him, like him and Commissioner Gordon. And I thought Jeffrey Wright was excellent, as I think he's one of the, really good Commissioner Gordon. Because Jeffrey Wright's just a fantastic actor, so he could play that, putting together the clues. What they forgot about film noirs, classic film noirs, is they were always about 80 to 90 minutes, which is about how much plot this movie has. But it just strings it out for 3 hours. I mean, not even 2 hours. You could easily have cut an hour off of this film, which is a lot. There's a love interest there, but Zoe Kravitz, I didn't think she was given quite enough to do. I did like that she had more backstory than they'd given previous versions of Selena Kyle. And she's actually more of a partner to Batman in this one than an enemy. But I think that works okay because he's already got plenty of enemies in this one. Because you have the John Turturro character, who's kind of a gangster. You have the Penguin, or Oz, who comes in, who is an unrecognizable Colin Farrell. I mean, at first, I didn't even know that was Colin Farrell until later. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we have the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, who I thought was excellent. But he's playing him as sort of like one of these like internet troll, just like psycho, super creepy people. I mean, the way his take on it, I thought was really interesting. But again, we've seen all of this before. We've seen the Joker. I mean, we've seen the Penguin. We've seen these characters in so many iterations. How many times can you make it exciting or new, especially when you don't wait? Batman Begins wasn't that long ago, the Batman series with Christian Bale, and they said that was going to be the darkest one yet. Now this one's even darker. Um, he's so miserable. They kind of go with a kind of grungy. They went with grunge music in this movie. They go with a grungy look for Robert Pattinson. He's pale. He's got black eyeliner for no reason that we can ascertain. I had no idea why he was dressed like Robert Smith from The Cure. I was like, okay, that's cool. I guess he's goth. That's one way to go about
mhm.
this movie, but it just didn't work for me overall as a 3 hour movie. I can't recommend it. They just need to stop at some point. And if they're really going to do the Batman again, then they need to think about like what type of way can really reinvigorate the series. I don't know. Maybe make it happy. Maybe that's a way to go. I don't know.
Well,
But
you mean like a musical?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that would definitely be something different, right? But the thing is, it's so dreary looking too, and it doesn't. It made me really miss. I couldn't believe I was thinking this because I'm not a big Tim Burton fan anymore. But it made me miss like color in the Tim Burton films. At least like at least the other characters were, even though Gotham itself is very dark and gothic. At least like the Riddler, the characters in the Tim Burton films were dressed colorfully. It was just like, gosh, can't we have some color on the screen occasionally? Does everything have to look so
Yeah.
gray and drab? I mean, when you're watching 3 hours of that, it just becomes tiresome. And film noir, by the way, does not look like that. Especially if you see neo noir from the 80s, they were actually very colorful. Noir means black. It doesn't have to mean that the film itself looks dark. It can be like the characters are black, right? So the
Mhm.
characters have are dark souls, or complicated at least. Yeah, I couldn't get into it, and it just I felt like so much of the stuff. Oh, he's so upset about his parents, and I'm like, we know about the Batman story.
Yeah,
So, and
which
I
is,
like all these actors.
right, which is, they don't really, like I said, they don't really focus that much on the story. They don't really focus that much on the toys, although
Yeah,
the bat car is pretty cool when it appears. But yeah, it just
but you don't get to see it very well because it's always raining and dark in the
yeah,
background, and there's so much CGI. It's just like I don't know.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I like all the actors in this one. That's the thing I was like, but I couldn't believe I was thinking as I was watching it, wow, I actually kind of miss the way the Tim Burton films looked. I'm kind of tired of this whole dark, dreary look that all these films have these days. So
Yeah.
anyway, we'll move on
Oh,
to our
to
next film,
another
which I'm
dark and
actually
dreary
more,
film.
well, but actually looks amazing. So we'll get to that in a minute. I'll let you introduce it.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, next film we're gonna talk about is the movie A Scanner Darkly from 2006, which stars Keanu Reeves. It has in it Woody Harrelson, Winona Ryder, um,
Robert
and
Downey Jr. Don't want to forget
yes,
him.
Robert Downey Jr. And amazingly enough, Alex Jones of InfoWars is in
Oh,
this film.
really?
Yes, yes. Look for the Street Prophet. Of all the
Oh,
things
that's
that he
him.
could have played, he's in this film. So to recap the story, well, this is based film-based science fiction film based on the works of a work of the same name by Philip K. Dick, who was a well-known science fiction writer who we know from other films, who's done the films like Blade Runner, which was based on his short story "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," or the Amazon series "The Man in the High Castle." And this is a story about a character played by Reeves who is a cop, and there is a drug epidemic going on, and a drug is called Substance D, highly addictive narcotic, and he's part of a group of cops who are trying to, uh, uh, like narco drug wars kind of stuff. And the way they do that is that he is living in a house with several other drug users, Harrelson, Ryder, Robert Downey Jr., and he but in his public life he is known as his real name is like Bob Arctor, and his drug name is I think Fred. And the movie goes through the story where he slowly becomes addicted to substance D. And it turns out that one of the things that happens with substance D is that it chemically separates the right and left hand sides of hemispheres of your brain, your creative versus your thoughtful side. And essentially, those two halves of your brain start to go to war with each other. And the film is about him slowly slipping into this unreality that is his life. And what I liked you mentioned the visually fascinating part of it. So this movie was directed by Richard Linklater, and it uses a technique called rotoscope. And rotoscope is a technique where they will actually film with regular film the movie, and then in a post production process, artists will go in and either hand animate or color, or will otherwise go in and animate those each frame of the movie. And
Right.
this
It's
was
very
actually
labor intensive. Yeah.
very, yeah, exactly. It was going to, I think the estimate was that for every minute of film, hand labor was 350 minutes of labor goes into that. And this actually, though, was one of the first movies using rotoscope that had a more automated process. But what I like about this, and I thought this was a brilliant choice on the director's part, because by using rotoscope, it makes everything feel squishy. Like
Hmm.
it's not really, you don't get a sense like you really know what's
Going
real.
on. Right.
Yeah.
It's
And that,
trippy, man.
yeah, yeah. And that's exactly how it is. And I saw this back when it first came out in 2006, and I didn't really get it at the time.
Mm.
But now that I watched this a second time, it, I really, really liked it,
Yeah.
so.
I actually think, and I am a big fan of Linklater's movies, but I think this is one of his best movies. It's one of his darkest movies for sure, because the topic is kind of dark. Like the characters, the society has descended into drugs. They say like 20% of the population in America is addicted to substance D, and because of that, the country's become kind of a police state where people can be surveillanced and scanned at any reason. And then there's this other company that has kind of taken over, that's providing care for people. That basically is like a national company that where people go to kind of get unhooked from substance D, where they have treatment centers everywhere. But that company also seems a little bit like there's something going on with them, which I won't give away. The use of the rotoscope, for people who aren't super into animated films, but I think this one it really works because it was all shot live action, so you can totally tell it's Keanu Reeves. Robert Downey Jr. in particular, his body movements and his, he just,
Yeah.
you're just immediately like, oh, that's Robert Downey Jr. Oh, that's Woody Harrelson, but it makes everything slightly off and kind of trippy looking, which really works for the topic because substance D itself makes everyone, especially as Keanu Reeves' character descends farther into this, he isn't sure if what he's seeing is real or not. And what he's experiencing is real or not. And that's one of the things substance D does to you. There's another character who starts to feel like there's bugs crawling all over. He can see the bugs. Nobody else can see them. But to him, they're as real as if they existed.
Yeah,
So,
that's true with especially because the character Keanu Reeves plays, when they're not in their persona as the in the drug house, he wears what's called a scramble suit, and the scramble suit essentially masks his entire body with constantly changing forms of images of people. And you get into the movie where he in his scramble suit is watching the footage from the house and does not realize that it's actually him in the house. He
right.
can't he can't dissociate.
He can't
And
even tell himself anymore, which he can't discern who he even
right,
is, which is also really interesting. So,
right.
yeah, it has the Philip K. Dick sense of like just, oh, things are not going to go well here. That foreboding, sort of apocalyptic sense that you get in his movies like Blade Runner or his stories. But Richard Linklater modernizes it. I'm assuming I haven't read the original book of A Scanner Darkly, but I would imagine a lot of the dialogue, because Linklater adapted this for the screen, especially a lot of the banter between the guys when they're just tripping out. Like there's a scene where I just watched this movie again so I could review it for the show because I saw it like you in the theater and then I rewatched it. To just today, actually. There's a scene where they're like talking about their car breaks down and they start to have all these conspiracy theories about like what happened to the car. Did someone do this to the car? And the thing about choosing great actors like Robert Downey and Woody Harrelson and Keanu Reeves to kind of be, especially those two though, to being off of each other is they're kind of like they're tripping out, but it's also very funny, but also scary at the same time.
Yeah,
So
and
I
you
love.
can just tell that they're just diving into this alternate reality. They're just
Right,
totally
right.
embracing it. And when
Yeah, and
and
the band, but the really rapid fire dialogue that Robert Downey in particular does, it made me really miss the kind of work he
right,
did before he
and
became
that
Iron Man when he used to be a real actor.
and at the end, yeah, and at the end, just one little quick note was that there's a list of people just before they go to credits of people who had that Philip K. Dick is in also in his book, and it's a list of all the people who he knew who died of drug overdoses or
Hmm.
had, including himself, because he'll list himself in there.
Did
Yeah.
he die of a drug overdose in real
No,
life?
no,
Oh, he did not.
he had
But
pancreatic cancer.
oh, okay. But he had drug. Did he have drug issues? He just knew a lot
Yeah,
of people who had drug
yeah,
issues. Oh, interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great film. I think it's actually one of Linklater's best films in some ways, because the material, his films tend to be more optimistic actually than this one. But I loved it, so I would definitely. It's on Criterion Channel right now as part of a Richard Linklater collection. So I highly recommend people check this one out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll move on to our next movie. Very different. This was my pick. I just
Oh,
wanted to watch something lighthearted because we had a lot of dark movies this episode. Designed for a Living from 1933 by the great filmmaker Ernst Lubitsch, a German immigrant who came to America and did wonderful romantic comedies throughout the 30s and 40s. It starts about a woman who cannot decide between Gary Cooper and Frederick March. Imagine that. So she decides, I'm not going to decide between the two of them. We're going to live together, all three of us, in a platonic relationship. So she tells them right at the beginning, no sex. We're gonna try that out, and that doesn't go so well because you can imagine. So eventually, romance just rears its head, and the three of them all end up deciding that they maybe can't do the whole thing platonically. The thing I loved about this movie, of course, besides the wonderful performances by the three leads, Miriam Cooper, Gary Cooper, Miriam Hopkins, Gary Cooper, and Frederick March, and the beautiful cinematography and photography of Ernst Lubitsch, who was known for the way his camera would glide. He just had this very smooth camera style and these amazing sets. He always had doors that were much larger than people. So as they went through the door, it looked like they were like tiny people going through doors. It's a pre-code movie. So in Hollywood, there was a code that came into effect in 1934, a censorship code. that banned all sorts of things. So films that you see before 1934 are often very racy, and this is an example of one where you would never see this. Just a year later, this would not have been allowed, where a woman is essentially like, well, I don't want to decide between these two guys, so I'm going to have a relationship with both of them. Would not happen after 1934, but did happen in 1933, and that's why this film is so much fun. So was this your first time seeing this one, Brad?
Yeah, yeah, it was, and like you, I looked at it and in the pre-code light, and I thought, yeah, it was racy. I mean, would you after 1934, would you have seen Napoleon wearing a Union suit? But yeah, it was. I thought it was it was kind of that 1930s kind of very snappy dialogue. The
Yeah.
story of Frederick March and Gary Cooper as two bohemian artists who are meet Gilda character, and she is a commercial artist herself, and working for an underwear company, which is where the Napoleon with the Union suit comes in,
Uh-huh.
and just their story as they rise to become well-known artists, and as you say, the relationship where they agree to do this gentleman's agreement where they would be with her, and then their story as they go through their lives, and she gets she can't decide between the two of them, so she says, "Yeah, why not? Let's just do the three of us."
Yeah,
And
which you can
yet
see
it's
why. Although I think I'd choose Gary Cooper. He was pretty hot in the early 30s. He's
well,
very handsome.
they each had their strong suits, and then there was also the character who was kind of the long term friend, but who had never, as Gary Cooper said, would told him, "So you've never gotten to first base, have you?"
Yeah, I know. And even saying that wouldn't have been allowed a year later. They couldn't even say the word
Right,
first base.
right.
Yeah, and she would have been portrayed as she would have had to die or have punishment as a woman who was sexually active, which in this film, it's just like, oh, she's just a modern woman.
Oh,
So it also shows you that progress isn't always what you think it is, because films actually were much more progressive in the 20s and early 30s than they
right.
became later on because of the code. But it's just a delightful film. It's frothy. It's fun. It's Everett Horton Hooper, I think is his name. I might be saying it
Everett
wrong.
Horton, who every time I
Everett
hear
Horton.
him,
He's in all those films. He always plays those kind of characters too.
and every time I hear his voice, I think of Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Oh
As
yeah.
he would tell the fable, was it the fractured fairy tales
Uh,
in that episode in
Yeah,
Rocky and
he has
Bullwinkle?
a great voice and he
Yeah,
always plays these kind of like befuddled characters. He's like, yeah, he's also sort of interested in her, but for different reasons than Gary Cooper and Frederick March. So a lot of fun. It's part of a pre-code collection on Criterion. They have a whole bunch of pre-code movies that are some tragedies, some comedies. This is one of the best in the collection. There's a few other like 4-star films on there, but for me, this is a 4-star film.
yeah.
So okay, so we got to wrap up. Thank you, Brad, for joining me. That was a fun show. I'm glad we got to wrap on a little lighter note than some of the other, because it was kind of dark movies. Although I would say Operation Mincemeat, well, it has a dark topic, obviously World War II, but it has obviously sort of a happy ending. I'm sorry, I'm not
Yeah.
giving anything away for people that don't know about World War II, but the British did defeat the Germans along with the help of the Americans. So, as always, you can check us out on Facebook, where our website, realfilmsnobs.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, hey, hit that little bell and subscribe, and you will get updated whenever there's a new episode. Thanks again to Brad for doing all this work on the show, plus offering to guest host now and again, which is very generous of him. We're also on a podcast on Anchor. We're on CC Media in Salem, Scan TV in Silverton, Corvallis Access Media, KMUZ Radio, KMWV FM Radio in the Salem area. Thank you, as always. Have a great day and great movies.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.